The moment my brother said those words, I knew I had him. She's just a lady, not too important to include on the inheritance. The room exploded with laughter, and I sat there perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, watching him grin like he'd just won the lottery. What Marcus didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been holding the winning hand all along. And in exactly 3 minutes, I was going to destroy him in front of everyone he'd ever wanted to impress. My name is Rita. I'm 36 years old. And this is the story of how I dismantled my brother's entire world with a single piece of paper and the truth he thought he'd buried forever. Let me paint you the picture. The conference room at Whitmore and Associates, Dad's lawyers for 23 years. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown, polished mahogany table that cost more than most people's cars, leather chairs that creaked when you shifted your weight. The kind of room designed to intimidate, to remind you that serious money is being discussed. 12 people sat around that table. Dad at the head, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him, his hands trembling slightly from the medication. Marcus to his right, wearing a navy suit that probably cost $3,000, his jaw sharp, his eyes gleaming with barely contained triumph. Our Uncle Bernard, Dad's younger brother who'd always resented not being the golden child. Aunt Linda, Mom's sister, who hadn't spoken to us in 5 years but showed up the second she heard the word inheritance. 3 cousins who barely knew Dad's middle name but suddenly cared deeply about family legacy. 2 of Dad's business partners, vultures in expensive cologne. And Dad's lead attorney, Vincent Chen, a man who'd seen every family destroy itself over money and somehow still believed in the law. Then there was me. Black dress, simple. No jewelry except Mom's wedding ring that Dad gave me when I turned 21. Hair pulled back. No makeup except a touch of lipstick. I'd learned a long time ago that when you're a woman in a room full of people waiting for you to be emotional, the best weapon is absolute calm. Marcus had been talking for 7 minutes straight. He had a whole presentation prepared, projected onto the screen behind him. Pie charts showing revenue growth. Timelines of business expansion. Photographs of Dad shaking hands with politicians and investors, and in almost every photo, there was Marcus, right beside him, smiling that perfect smile. Not a single picture included me. Before I continue, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories like this, please like and subscribe. It helps me keep sharing more. As you can see, Marcus said, clicking to another slide, the company has grown 300% under the leadership structure Dad and I built together. The vision has always been clear, one strong leader, one unified direction. No confusion, no conflict, no splitting the legacy into pieces that can't support the weight. He paused, looked around the room, making eye contact with each person like a politician working a crowd. Now, I love my sister. I do. Rita's smart, she's capable in her own way. But let's be honest about what this company needs moving forward. It needs someone who understands the market, who has the relationships, who can make the hard calls. It needs someone who's been groomed for this from day one. Uncle Bernard nodded, already bought in. Aunt Linda glanced at me with something between pity and smugness. The cousins didn't even look my way. Marcus smiled, and that's when he said it. She's just a lady, not too important to include on the inheritance. The room erupted. Laughter, actual laughter. Derek, my cousin who once borrowed $5,000 from me and never paid it back, slapped the table so hard his water glass jumped. Uncle Bernard let out a bark of approval. Even Vincent Chen, the attorney, cracked a tight smile like he'd heard worse, and this was just another day in the inheritance circus. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just sat there, feeling the heat rise in my chest, not from anger but from something colder. Clarity. Purpose. The absolute certainty that I was about to flip this entire room upside down. I let the laughter continue for exactly 5 seconds. Then I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking softly, and I smiled. Not a big smile. Just a small curve of my lips, the kind that makes people nervous because it doesn't match the moment. I turned my head slowly, deliberately, until I was looking directly at Dad. His face was pale, his eyes watery from the medication, but he was watching me. He'd been quiet this whole meeting, letting Marcus run the show, and I could see the exhaustion in every line of his face. "Dad," I said, my voice calm, almost gentle. "You really don't know, do you?" He froze. I watched it happen in real time. His breathing stopped. His fingers, which had been tapping lightly on the armrest, went completely still. The color drained from his face like someone had opened a valve. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. It was the kind of silence that pulls all the oxygen out of a room. Marcus's smile flickered. Just for a second, but I saw it. The crack in the mask. "Know what?" he said, his voice sharp, defensive. But there was something underneath it now. Something that sounded a lot like fear. I didn't answer. Not yet. I let the question hang there, heavy and suffocating, while everyone else in the room leaned forward, desperate to know what I was holding. "But you need to understand how we got here. You need to know what led to this moment, because this wasn't just about one meeting or one insult. This was about years of being erased. Years of being invisible. And if you've ever felt like your own family doesn't see you, if you've ever been pushed aside for someone louder or more confident, then you already know why what I'm about to do is justified. Marcus and I used to be close. Really close. When Mom died, we were all we had. I was 9, he was 12, and Dad disappeared into his work like it was a life raft. The house felt enormous and empty, every room echoing with her absence. I remember the night of the funeral, sitting on the back porch with Marcus while the sun set in shades of purple and gold. He put his arm around me, and even though he was only 12, he sounded so much older when he said, "We only have each other now, Rita. No matter what happens, we stick together." I believed him. God, I believed him so completely. For years, we were a team. We covered for each other, protected each other, survived Dad's emotional absence together. But then something changed. It wasn't sudden. It was slow, like rust spreading across metal. It started when Dad began grooming Marcus to take over the business. Marcus was 16, already tall and confident, already comfortable in rooms full of adults. Dad started taking him to meetings, teaching him the game, showing him how power worked. And I was left at home, told to focus on school, told that I didn't need to worry about the business side of things. "You're smart, Rita," Dad said once, patting my head like I was still a child. "But this world, it's brutal. I don't want you to have to deal with it." What he meant was, "You're a girl, and girls don't belong here." By the time I was 21, I had a degree in finance and another in business law. I'd graduated top of my class, turned down job offers from 3 major firms, and come back to work for the family company because I thought that's what family did. You showed up. You contributed. You built the legacy together. But Marcus didn't see it that way. To him, I was support staff. I was the person who handled the boring details while he closed the deals and shook the hands and smiled for the cameras. I managed the finances, kept the books clean, structured the contracts, made sure we stayed on the right side of the law. Marcus took credit for the growth. And slowly, meeting by meeting, year by year, I became invisible. Before I continue with what happened next, you need to subscribe to Revenge Dark Story because what I'm about to reveal will shock you. Hit that subscribe button now. Do you know what it's like to work yourself to exhaustion for people who don't even see you? To pour everything you have into something, only to watch someone else take the applause? If you do, then you understand why I didn't interrupt Marcus during his presentation. Why I sat there and let him perform. Because I knew something he didn't. I knew that his entire empire was built on sand. And I was about to wash it away. 2 years ago, Dad got sick. Pancreatic cancer, stage 3, the kind that doesn't leave much room for hope. He fought it at first, refused to believe his body could betray him after all the battles he'd won in business. But cancer doesn't care about your resume. The treatments broke him down, turned him frail and weak, and for the first time in my life, I saw my father scared. Marcus visited twice a month, always with an excuse. Always too busy, always closing some deal that couldn't wait. But I was there. Every chemo appointment. Every sleepless night when the pain got so bad Dad couldn't lie still. Every moment when he stared at the ceiling and wondered out loud if his life had meant anything. I read to him, old westerns mostly, his favorites. Louis L'Amour, Zane Grey, stories about men who lived by codes and faced their deaths with dignity. And during those long, quiet hours, Dad talked. He told me things he'd never said before. About regrets. About Mom. About how he wished he'd been a different kind of father. I thought if I built something big enough, he whispered one night, his voice thin and rasping, it would make up for not being there. I thought the money would prove I loved you. I held his hand, felt how fragile it had become, bones and skin and nothing else. It's okay, Dad, I said, even though it wasn't. Even though some wounds don't heal. But here's what I didn't know. While I was sitting at Dad's bedside, reading him stories and holding his hand, Marcus was busy. He was meeting with lawyers, restructuring the inheritance, slowly convincing Dad that the company needed one strong leader. Rita doesn't want the pressure, Marcus told him. She's happy doing her thing. She doesn't want to run the company. Let me take care of it. Let me carry the weight. And Dad, sick and tired and trusting, believed him. 3 months ago, I was at Dad's house. He was asleep upstairs, knocked out by the pain medication, and I was in his office organizing files. Not snooping, just cleaning, trying to create some order in the chaos of medical bills and old business documents. And that's when I found it. The envelope. It was tucked inside an old photo album, hidden between pictures of Mom. Pictures I'd seen 1,000 times, her laughing at the beach, holding me as a baby, dancing with Dad at their anniversary party. But I'd never noticed the envelope before. It was addressed to me. In Dad's handwriting. But it had never been opened, never been sent. My hand shook as I opened it. Inside was a letter, 3 pages, handwritten in the shaky script of someone who could barely hold a pen. It was dated 6 months ago, right after Dad's first round of chemo. And what it said changed everything. The letter wasn't about love or apologies or regrets. It was a confession. Dad wrote that he'd always known Marcus was different. That from the time Marcus was a teenager, Dad had suspected something was off. Small things at first. Money missing from petty cash. Lies about where he'd been, who he'd been with. But Dad had ignored it, chalked it up to teenage rebellion, told himself it would pass. But it didn't pass. It got worse. The letter detailed everything. How Marcus had embezzled funds from the company, small amounts at first, then larger and larger sums, always covering his tracks, always one step ahead. How he'd used Dad's name to secure loans he never intended to repay. How he'd sabotaged business deals that would have benefited me, made sure I was kept out of major decisions, poisoned Dad's mind against trusting me with real responsibility. And the worst part, the part that made my hands shake so hard I almost dropped the letter, Marcus had forged documents. He'd created fake contracts, fake emails, fake everything to make it look like I was the one mismanaging funds. He'd built an entire false narrative, a backup plan in case anyone ever questioned his control. He was going to frame me. If the company ever faced an audit, if anyone ever looked too closely, I was going to be the scapegoat. Dad wrote that he'd only discovered it recently, when his accountant flagged some irregularities and Dad, too sick to handle it himself, had asked an outside investigator to dig quietly. The investigator found everything. And Dad, horrified and ashamed, wrote me the letter. But he never sent it. He never confronted Marcus. He was too weak, too sick, too afraid of destroying what was left of the family. So he hid the letter in the photo album, between pictures of Mom, maybe hoping I'd find it someday. Maybe hoping I'd be strong enough to do what he couldn't. I sat in that office for 2 hours, reading and rereading the letter, feeling everything inside me shift. The grief, the anger, the betrayal, it all crystallized into something sharp and clear. Marcus hadn't just stolen from the company. He'd stolen my life. My reputation. My future. And he'd done it with a smile, with speeches about family and legacy, while planning to burn me to the ground if he ever needed to. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront him privately. I wasn't going to give him a chance to spin another lie, to manipulate Dad, to weasel his way out. I was going to wait for the perfect moment. And that moment was today. This meeting. In front of everyone. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely, someone who smiled to your face while destroying you behind your back, then you know exactly what I felt in that moment. You know why I couldn't let this go. You know why justice had to be public. Subscribe right now if you want to see how this ends, because what happens next will restore your faith that the truth always wins. I stood up slowly, feeling every eye in the room on me. I reached into my purse, pulled out the folded letter, and placed it on the table in front of Dad. The paper looked so small, so harmless. But I knew what it contained. And I knew what it was about to do. This, I said quietly, my voice steady. Do you want to tell them, Marcus, or should I? The room went dead silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the faint traffic noise from the street below, the sound of someone's breath catching in their throat. Marcus stared at the letter like it was a bomb. His face went white. His jaw clenched. His hands, which had been so confident and expressive during his presentation, slowly curled into fists. What is that? He said, his voice tight. Nothing, I said. Just a letter Dad wrote. About you. About what you've been doing for the last 15 years. Dad's eyes widened. He reached for the letter with shaking hands, unfolded it, and I watched his face crumble as he read his own words. Uncle Bernard leaned forward. What's going on? Vincent Chen, the attorney, adjusted his glasses, his professional mask slipping into something more alert, more concerned. Marcus stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is ridiculous, he said, his voice rising. Whatever she's trying to pull, it's garbage. She's desperate, sit down, Marcus, Dad said. His voice was weak, but it cut through the room like a knife. Marcus froze. Dad looked up at him, and for the first time in years, I saw my father angry. Really, truly angry. Sit down. Marcus sat. And I smiled. Because now it was my turn to talk. Dad's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the letter. I watched the paper tremble between his fingers, watched his lips move silently as he reread his own words, as if seeing them now in this room full of witnesses made them real in a way they hadn't been when he wrote them alone in the dark. Marcus was still standing, frozen like a statue, his face drained of all color except for 2 spots of red high on his cheekbones. Anger or fear, I couldn't tell which. Maybe both. The rest of the room had gone so quiet I could hear Uncle Bernard's breathing, heavy and confused. Aunt Linda's mouth hung slightly open. The cousins looked between Marcus and me like they were watching a tennis match, waiting to see who would score the next point. Vincent Chen, the attorney, had his pen poised over his legal pad, but he wasn't writing. He was watching. Calculating. Already thinking about liability, I suspected. Rita, Dad said finally, his voice cracking. How did you? You hid it in Mom's photo album, I said softly. Between the pictures from her 40th birthday party. I found it 3 months ago when I was cleaning your office. Marcus's head snapped toward Dad. What is she talking about? What letter? But Dad wasn't looking at him. Dad was looking at me, and in his eyes I saw something I'd never seen before. Shame. Deep, crushing shame. I should have told you, he whispered. I should have confronted him. I was too weak, I was too scared of losing what was left of this family, and I. His voice broke completely. I'm so sorry, Rita. I'm so sorry. Before I continue, drop a comment right now and tell me, have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and exposing the truth? Because what I did next changed everything, and I need you to stay with me. Marcus slammed his hand down on the table. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot, making Aunt Linda jump. This is insane, he said, his voice tight and controlled but with an edge of hysteria creeping in. Whatever she found, whatever she thinks she found, it's taken out of context. Dad was sick, he was on medication, he wasn't thinking clearly. I was thinking perfectly clearly, Dad said. His voice was stronger now, anger giving him strength. I hired an investigator, Marcus. A forensic accountant. Someone outside the family, someone with no stake in protecting you. The room erupted. Uncle Bernard half rose from his chair. What are you talking about? What investigation? Vincent Chin set down his pen very carefully. Mr. Castellano, I need to advise you that if there are allegations of financial impropriety, this meeting should probably. Sit down, Vincent, Dad said. Everyone sit down and listen. Because my daughter is right. I didn't know. I didn't want to know. But now it's time everyone heard the truth. I could have kissed him in that moment. For years, I'd watched my father choose Marcus over me, choose comfort over truth, choose the easy lie over the hard conversation. But now, finally, he was choosing right. Even if it was destroying him to do it. Marcus was breathing hard, his chest rising and falling rapidly. His hands had curled into fists at his sides. You're making a mistake, he said, but he was looking at me, not Dad. You're making a huge mistake, Rita. Am I? I said calmly. Because from where I'm sitting, the only mistake I made was staying quiet for so long. I turned to face the room, making eye contact with each person. Uncle Bernard, who'd always dismissed me as too soft for business. Aunt Linda, who'd told me at Mom's funeral that I should focus on finding a husband instead of chasing careers. The cousins who'd never bothered to learn what I actually did for the company. And the business partners, who'd smiled and shook Marcus's hand at every meeting while I sat in the corner taking notes like a secretary. For 15 years, I said, I've worked for this company. I structured every major deal. I managed the finances. I kept us legal and profitable. And for 15 years, Marcus took credit for my work while systematically destroying my reputation behind the scenes. Here's what I need you to understand, and this is critical. What I'm about to reveal isn't just about one family's drama. It's about what happens when you finally decide you're done being invisible. If you've ever reached that point, that moment where you have to choose yourself even if it costs you everything, then subscribe to Revenge Dark Story right now. Because this is where everything explodes. I pulled a folder from my bag. Not a small folder, a thick one, bulging with documents. I'd been carrying it since I found the letter, waiting for this exact moment. I dropped it on the table with a heavy thud. That, I said, is 3 years of financial records. Bank statements, wire transfers, loan applications, forged signatures. All of it documented, all of it verified by the investigator Dad hired. Marcus didn't just steal from the company. He stole millions. And he did it by making it look like I was the one mismanaging the funds. Uncle Bernard grabbed the folder, yanked it open. His eyes went wide as he flipped through the pages. Jesus Christ, he breathed. Marcus, these signatures, these transfers. They're fake, Marcus said quickly. She fabricated all of it. She's desperate, she knows she's getting cut out of the inheritance, so she's making up lies too. They're not fake, Vincent Chin said quietly. He'd taken some of the documents from Uncle Bernard, was examining them with the careful eye of someone who'd spent decades reading contracts and spotting fraud. These account numbers are real. These transfers happened. I can verify half of these myself from our own records. The walls were closing in. I could see it happening in real time, could see Marcus's carefully constructed world starting to crumble. But he wasn't done fighting. "This is a setup," he said, turning to Dad. "Dad, listen to me. Rita's been planning this. She's always been jealous, always resented that you chose me to lead the company. She found some discrepancies, sure, every company has accounting issues, and she twisted them into this narrative to make me look bad. You can't seriously believe." "I found the offshore accounts," I said simply. The room went silent again. Marcus's face went from red to white to gray. "The ones in the Cayman Islands," I continued. "The shell companies in Panama. The real estate holdings in your name that were purchased with company funds. Should I go on, or do you want to tell them yourself?" Marcus looked like he might be sick. For a long moment, he just stood there, swaying slightly, and I wondered if he was going to pass out or run or maybe throw himself out the window. But then something changed in his face. The fear melted away, replaced by something harder. "Meaner. You self-righteous bitch," he said softly. Aunt Linda gasped. Uncle Bernard started to stand. But I just smiled. "There it is," I said. "The real Marcus. Not the charming businessman. Not the devoted son. Just the angry little boy who can't stand that someone finally called him out." He took a step toward me, and for a second I thought he might actually hit me. But Dad's voice cracked like a whip. "Marcus. Sit down." "No," Marcus said. He was breathing hard, his whole body tense. "No, I'm not going to sit here and let her destroy everything I built." "Everything we built, Dad. You and me. We made this company what it is. Not her. She's just the bookkeeper, the paper pusher. She doesn't understand what it takes to really lead, to make the hard choices." "The hard choices?" I said. "Is that what you call embezzlement? Fraud? Forgery?" "I call it vision," Marcus snapped. "I call it doing whatever it takes to grow the business, to make it successful, to turn Dad's small operation into an empire." "You think that happens by following every little rule, by being safe and careful?" "No. It happens by taking risks, by being bold, by stealing," I said flatly. "By lying. By framing your own sister for your crimes. Do you think there's ever a justification for betraying family? Do you think success built on lies is really success at all? Drop your answer in the comments, because I want to know where you stand on this." Marcus laughed, but it was a bitter, broken sound. "You want to know the truth? Fine. Yes, I moved money around. Yes, I took some loans using the company as collateral. Yes, I made deals that weren't exactly by the book. But every single thing I did was to make this company bigger, stronger, more profitable. And it worked. Look at the numbers. Look at what we're worth now compared to 10 years ago. We're worth nothing if it's all built on fraud," Vincent Chin said quietly. "Marcus, I need to be very clear with you. If even a quarter of what's in these documents is accurate, you're not just looking at civil liability. You're looking at federal charges. Wire fraud, bank fraud, tax evasion." "I want a lawyer," Marcus said suddenly. "I'm not saying anything else without my lawyer present." "Smart," I said. "You're going to need a good one." Uncle Bernard was still flipping through the documents, his face growing darker with each page. "The Sanderson deal," he said. "Marcus, you told us that deal fell through because of market conditions. But according to this, you tanked it deliberately because it would have given Rita more control over the European division." Marcus said nothing. "The Peterson account," Aunt Linda said, her voice shaking. She'd found another section of the documents. "You told us we lost them to a competitor. But this says you embezzled their deposits and covered it up by claiming they'd gone with another firm." Still nothing. The evidence was overwhelming. I'd spent 3 months building this case, cross-referencing every transaction, verifying every detail. There was no way out for him. No clever explanation, no spin that would make this okay. If you're watching this and you've ever had to burn everything down to rebuild it right, if you've ever had to expose someone you love because the truth mattered more than the relationship, then you understand what I'm feeling right now. This isn't victory. This is survival. Subscribe if you need to see how this ends, because the final twist is something nobody saw coming. Dad had been silent through most of this, just sitting at the head of the table with tears running down his face. Now he spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "Why, Marcus? We gave you everything. I gave you everything. Why wasn't it enough?" Marcus looked at his father, and for just a second, I saw something vulnerable flash across his face. Something young and hurt. "Because it was never really mine," he said quietly. "Everything you gave me came with conditions, with expectations, with the constant reminder that I had to earn it, had to prove I was worthy of the Castellano name. Nothing was ever just freely given. Nothing was ever enough to make you actually proud of me." "I was proud of you," Dad said, his voice breaking. "I was always proud of you." "No," Marcus said. "You were proud of what I achieved. You were proud of the deals I closed, the money I made, the success I brought. But me? The actual person? You never saw me. You never saw either of us. We were just extensions of your legacy, pieces you could move around on your board." The room had gone very quiet. Because as much as I hated to admit it, Marcus wasn't entirely wrong. Dad had been absent, emotionally distant, more focused on building an empire than a family. But that didn't excuse what Marcus had done. Didn't justify the stealing, the lying, the betrayal. "You're right," I said, and Marcus's head snapped toward me in surprise. Dad wasn't perfect. He wasn't there for us the way he should have been. And yeah, maybe that messed us both up in different ways. But you know what, Marcus? I grew up in the same house you did. I had the same absent father, the same pressure, the same expectations. And I didn't turn into a criminal." His face hardened again. "No, you just turned into a self-righteous martyr who thinks suffering in silence makes you noble. At least I had the guts to take what I wanted instead of waiting for someone to notice me and hand it over." "I didn't want it handed over," I said. "I wanted to earn it. I wanted to build something real, something honest. Something I could be actually proud of." "Well, congratulations," Marcus said bitterly. "You win. You get to be the good daughter, the honest one, the one who did everything right. I hope it keeps you warm at night when you're running a company you don't know how to run, dealing with people who will eat you alive the second they smell weakness." "I've been running it for years," I said calmly. "You just didn't notice because you were too busy taking credit and stealing from the accounts I balanced." Vincentian cleared his throat. "I think we need to adjourn this meeting. There are legal implications that need to be addressed separately. Mr. Castellano, both of you, I strongly suggest you retain separate legal counsel. And Marcus, I need to inform you that as the company's attorney, I'm legally obligated to report suspected fraud to the authorities." Marcus laughed again, that same bitter sound. "Of course you are. Everyone's so ethical all of a sudden. Everyone's so concerned about doing the right thing." He looked around the room at all the faces staring at him. Family members who'd praised him an hour ago now looking at him like he was a stranger. "You're all hypocrites. Every single one of you would have done the same thing if you'd had the opportunity. You just didn't have the access, the intelligence, or the guts." "No," Uncle Bernard said heavily. "We wouldn't have. And that's the difference between you and the rest of us, Marcus. You think everyone's as corrupt as you are. You think everyone's just waiting for the chance to cheat and steal. But most people, most decent people, they don't think that way." Marcus grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair. "I'm done here. This meeting is over." "Sit down," Dad said again, but there was no force behind it this time. Just exhaustion and grief. "Marcus, please, we need to talk about this, we need to figure out." "There's nothing to figure out," Marcus said. You've made your choice. You're believing her over me. Fine. I don't need this family. I don't need any of you. He headed for the door, but I stepped in front of him. We were inches apart, and I could see the rage and fear warring in his eyes. Move, he said quietly. Not until you admit it, I said. Not until you look me in the eye and admit what you did to me. What you were going to do to me. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. 15 years of resentment and betrayal and sibling rivalry compressed into that single moment. Then Marcus leaned close, so close I could smell the coffee on his breath, and whispered so only I could hear. I would have destroyed you completely and never lost a second of sleep over it. You were collateral damage in a bigger game, Rita. And the saddest part? You still don't even understand how the game is really played. He stepped around me and walked out. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded louder than a slam would have. Nobody spoke for a long time. Then Dad broke down completely, his shoulders shaking with sobs, and I found myself moving to his side, putting my hand on his shoulder even though part of me wanted to rage at him for not protecting me sooner, for choosing comfort over truth for so long. I'm sorry, he kept saying. I'm so sorry, Rita. I should have seen it. I should have stopped it. I know, I said softly. Because what else was there to say? The damage was done. The family was broken. The company would survive, but it would never be the same. Uncle Bernard was on his phone, already calling his own lawyer. Aunt Linda was crying quietly. The cousins looked shell-shocked. Vincent Chen was organizing the documents, his face grim and professional. And I stood there in the ruins of my family's legacy, feeling strangely empty. I'd won. I'd exposed the truth, protected myself, ensured that Marcus would face consequences for what he'd done. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like the end of something that had been dying for a long time, and I'd just been the one to finally pull the plug. 3 weeks later, Marcus was arrested. Federal charges, just like Vincent had predicted. Wire fraud, bank fraud, tax evasion, the whole menu of financial crimes. The story made the news, local at first, then picked up by some of the business publications. Empire built on fraud, Castellano Air faces federal charges. They used his confident corporate headshot with the article, and the contrast between that smiling, successful face and the mugshot from his arrest was almost funny. Almost. Dad died 2 months after that. The cancer, the stress, the heartbreak of watching his son's arrest and his legacy crumble, it was too much. He went peacefully, in his sleep, with me holding his hand. His last words to me were, "I'm proud,